dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll those dice.
Howdy, I'm Dungeon Master Sleeve McDickle.
And I could do.
You can't do
I'm
it.
Dungeon Master Glenallen Mixon, and welcome to Dungeon Master of None.
Today we're talking about the importance of names and naming in your campaigns and world building. Yeah, which is why, you listen, all names are is you switch a couple letters around.
That's
and
right.
They sound great.
That's what my good friend Greg Rung always says is
Yeah, I overheard him telling that to Mike Truck.
We'll link the 1994 fighting baseball roster in the show notes, which is where these names are coming from. There has never been a better list of fake names in any language, but this one is real good.
It's
but
actually
yeah.
a good lesson too. In
It
that
is a good lesson.
I am sure when this came out in this game for children in a non-Indo-European, non-English speaking country, these names sounded fine. And
They
so
sounded great.
We just want to let you know how low the bar is.
The bar is really low, and this jumps ahead to like one of the tips that I wrote down. But yeah, you can just move letters around. I'm sorry, it's so good. But yeah, Matt's right though. The bar is low, and before we delve deeper, I want to address the mechanical elephant in the room, because we're going to be talking about names and how to make them and lists of them and all that. And you, modern human that you are, might be saying, but Rob and Matt, why wouldn't I just use ChatGPT to generate a list of names?
Yeah.
And to that I say, I actually can't think of a good reason. To be honest, in terms of like use cases, generating a list of names is probably one of the best things you could use ChatGPT for. It doesn't matter, especially if they're like fantasy names. It doesn't matter if it hallucinates some. Like it really doesn't matter. So if you want to, go for it. I'm gonna just sort of sidestep the ethical considerations. We've talked about those before, but like, for you personally, if that's how you want to do names, if you're busy, this doesn't interest you, you can turn off the podcast and go use ChatGPT. However, the reason why I think this is interesting and why I think this is worth doing is, well, one, I think it's fun. I like this. I like talking.
You got to
about
like
names,
it a little bit.
thinking about names and coming up with names. But two, I do think that having an understanding of where names come from and how naming conventions work and the relationships between names and places and people gives you a more full and holistic understanding of both like real things and fake things. Like if you know why all the villagers in your village are named the way that they are, or have like even a very like simple metric, you'll have a better control of that situation in the game, and it'll feel more real to yourself and your players. I think this is a thing that is worth doing if you have time, but I guess don't feel obligated if you don't enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, names are really important to people and to places. And if you're building a campaign, everyone should have a name that the players interact with in a meaningful way. Everything, every person, every place. And if you're putting effort into it, why wouldn't you? Yes, you could go to fantasynamegenerator.com. I have gone to it before. It's one of those websites you can pull up while you're DMing, or ChatGPT. I
actually really hate that one, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't like the names on Fantasy Name Generator. It's not hard to do, but
yeah,
they do it bad. I don't know.
I think they've got a real generic quality to them, and I found that was the case when I tried ChatGPT too. Like, my first fantasy name is like Calith Drakmore. That just like doesn't sound real. And I think one of the things that even in a fantasy game is you can make your names sound memorable and real. It's not that hard, and there's like a ton of ways to get at that with a little bit of effort, with a lot of effort, and you can kind of pick which one suits your game.
Yeah, and I don't know how you approach this, Matt, but I have sort of like 3 tiers of effort for coming up with names, and I use all 3 depending on how excited I am about names on any given day.
Right.
But you can go one step above Fantasy Name Generator and ChatGPT and really easily come up with a list of names, or you can spend a little bit more time on it. But I do think it's worth doing. I think it's fun.
Yeah, let's jump into the first tier. I mean, like for me, this is like going to baby name lists or surname lists in another language or from another part of the world than where my players are mostly from. And, maybe I'll tweak them a little bit. Maybe I won't.
Yeah, for me, this is the same thing, except I like to pick like a historical period. So something I've done, a really like rich vein for this is like Victorian names. So these aren't all like completely out of date, but they got things like Theodore and Silas and Felix and Enoch and Archibald and Ebenezer. These are names that are just slightly different enough that it's gonna sound potentially fantastical, and you can
if you meet someone named Constance or Hard Work, right?
Yes.
You're like in maybe a religious or a conservative group of people, right? The historical names are super great. You can just Google it, or you can find a historical document that has a lot of names, like ships registers or
censuses,
taxes.
A lot of these are Sensei.
You can go to the Doomsday Book or, all these types of things. And I find like, I don't know if this is the right part to put this in the conversation, but like for me, the thing that works best is just like a half step or a step away from my players' native tongues, right? All the players in one of my games grew up speaking a Indo-European language. So I stick within that, but not one of the ones my players grew up speaking. If I head to a non-Indo-European language, I have trouble saying the names. So then that's territory you never want to get to. The names have to be able to roll off your own tongue in order to work.
Yeah. So I do something similar. I tend to stick to around the Indo-European tree, but with a couple of exceptions. Like Matt, I some things are difficult. I also don't want to do an Orientalism, so I try not to lean too heavily on anything that isn't, sort of the West, but that leaves a lot of interesting room to maneuver if you're clever. Like another thing that you can do is you can pick a very common name and just find the root. So, Elizabeth becomes Elspeth. Robert becomes Rothbert or Rodbert. Michael becomes Mikhail. Charles Carolus. Henry is Heinrich. Rogers Rothgar. These are those are again sufficiently different names to fit a fantastical setting, but you're not stretching either your pronunciation or your familiarity too much.
They still kind of sound like names, right?
Yes.
To us, right? And that's, I think, often what you're going for is things that sound like names, but not always.
No, I'm agreeing with you. This is kind of my objection, and we'll get to this later with the fantasy name generator and with a lot of just swap some syllables around things, is they don't sound like names. This is a very subjective thing, so your mileage may vary, but I'll read books or play games and I'm like, I don't buy that, right? But there's lots of fantasy books that I do read with really weird names. They sound like names. They make sense to me. I've got several examples of that in the hard mode section, but this, like I said, your mileage may vary on this, but for me, they gotta sound like names. They gotta sound plausible, and this is a fine line to trod because some things that are names can sound silly. Matt, if I say this Tiffany problem, does that mean anything to you?
The what problem?
The Tiffany problem.
Tiffany. Oh no, it doesn't mean anything to me. Should it?
So the problem is that Tiffany is a medieval name. But if you run into like a Princess Tiffany in your games, like to us moderns, that sounds
because it was so popular a couple of years ago. Yeah,
but it is actually like an ancient name. So like this is both like a real and invented problem. Like, you know, you actually have to kind of think about like what's going to sound right for the setting or for the area region.
Right. This perfectly illustrates the larger point. The Tiffany problem is that like what sounds like a name is completely contextual on the moment you're living in, the languages you can speak, the language you grew up speaking, and most importantly, the languages and the culture your players are in. So that's why I say, you know, go a half step away temporally or spatially.
We mentioned history or a nearby region. Mythology is always really good. Like again, for staying within sort of like the broad West, like lists of angels are a good one. There's lots of angels with like very normal names like Michael, but then there's, you know, lots of them with, you know, more bizarre names, but they still sound like names. Also deities, again, be careful. You can, you know, go one way or another. But like as an example, I pulled a list of names from Hindu mythology that would sound pretty normal. Names like Parvati, Tara, Kamala, you know, Shashti. Those all are entirely reasonable names. You know, you want to be careful with this in both directions, but a lot of people, the reason why this works is because people name their children after mythological figures commonly in all regions of the world. And so this is a really like easy place to go if you're trying to like come up with lists of names.
Is there anything in this like really, really low effort zone that we're skipping over before we move to another tier of at least what I consider for my prep way more work than I normally do?
Yeah. I have one like other easy mode thing, and that's just to sort of like, and this doesn't work quite as well for like a fantasy game, but if you were running a contemporary one or like a future one, but also like depending on the setting, it can work for fantasy. It's just you mash two cultures together. So like you've got an Abraham Wong or an Iskandar Jones or something like that. And to illustrate this, I want to like, some of that stuff's going to sound weird and you have to be careful, but like I want to use like Joe DiMaggio as an example, right? Like Joe DiMaggio is a name that sounds very normal to us, that because, you know, we all grew up hearing about him, right?
Right.
But he was probably born or maybe named something like, you know, Giuseppe DiMaggio. And like my great-grandfather was born, you know, Giovanni DiMarta or something like that. But he became John Marta when he moved to the United States. So like something may sound unusual, but it's really like this is how we have been doing names forever. So feel free to play around with that. I like to have like just like a list of first names and last names and just sort of like roll randomly and see what sounds good. But this is a good way to come up with a lot of mostly useful names.
Yeah. I mean, if you're generating lists, right, generate more than you need, write down more than you need, and then just like pick the ones that are easy to say and you feel like are memorable and fit the theme you're going for. If we're stealing, I mean, there's also, I guess this is a little more effort than going to baby names and stuff like that, is you can always get the text files from a video game of their list of NPCs. It's not hard Googling or copying from like the game's wiki. The same is true for wikis on like fantasy novels and stuff like that. And this is more effort than I usually put in unless I'm at the beginning of the campaign. So we're moving to tier 2. I'll go to a place, like a map of a region, and pull names from there for both people and places, right? Because, you know, maps are often just like lists of labels. And so I'll pull that, right? I might do a fancy historical map if I'm feeling really inspired. But yeah, usually just a place, just Google Earth. Yeah,
this is pivoting because we've mostly been talking about people names, but with place names, this might be between easy mode and medium, but, you know, transposing or using like older versions of a place is a really easy thing. I in doing research for this episode. Matt, have we talked about Fourth Wing yet? Did you read Fourth Wing?
I've read the first third of Fourth Wing. So a third of a fourth of a wing. So like
Anyway.
1/12 of a wing.
One of the kingdoms, maybe the main kingdom in Fourth Wing, is called Navarre, which is
It's just a place. That's a
it's
real
just a place.
kingdom.
It's a real kingdom. You can just do that. You can just pick one. I like to use Albion a lot, or
Yeah.
Columbia if I'm running a campaign where that would be relevant. Find out the ancient name for things. It's cool. Alemannia, Gaul.
I mean,
You can
this is
also
also super easy in that, like, if you get an old language dictionary or a new language dictionary, names of places are not complicated, right? There's that like place in England, Torpenhow Hill, which is like hill, right? Just in
Right.
3 different languages.
I was actually going to talk at length about English place names
Yeah.
in sort of like the second part. But you can another clever thing to do is move nouns from one sort of like realm to another. In The Princess Bride, the nations are Florin and Gilder, which are both they're types of coins.
Yeah.
This is moderately clever, that it tricks a lot of people who don't know about medieval numismology, numismatics is what I meant to say.
One of those.
But yeah, don't overthink this. Just whatever sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, and there are some great websites for this. One that I have to shout out because, it's near and dear to my heart, is the World Historical Gazetteer. Link in the show notes, I guess,
good one.
whgazetteer.org. And they have data sets with lists of historical place names. And some of them, West African ports, there's a couple hundred. But like for the Mediterranean, they have several thousand. So if you're running a Greek or Mediterranean style Roman campaign, there's just a million old place names for you to steal. You can tweak them a little bit, remix them, boom.
There's lots of lists, and they take a little bit of effort to find and dig through, but not that much. There are a lot of like really annoying bullshit websites now when you like search for names. So maybe don't even bother with Googling. Just go directly to a source you can trust. But it's still pretty easy to find good lists of names to pull from.
Well, one I want to shout out also is samcodes.co.uk/project/Markov-NameGen. Link in the show notes, I suppose. The Markov name generator. So you can upload a list that's preloaded in there, or you can put a list of words of your own, and it will just run them through whatever Markov procedural generator with Markov chains, and it will, just tweak the names a little bit, right? By replacing a consonant or a vowel or mashing 2 things together. Boom. If you wanted to take like a list of Greek gods, or maybe Greek's a bad example, but like Norse gods, and tweak them a little bit for a Norse-inspired set of person names, it'll make them a little different, and maybe only 1 out of 10 will be good, but you'll have 100. So boom, there's 10 names.
I mean, that's the thing is it's really easy to generate a big list, and then the easiest thing in the world is just cross out all the ones you don't like. Make more than you need, and then pick and choose. All right, shall we go to the slightly more advanced section, Matt?
Okay, are we up to tier 3? Yeah, let's do it. All right. Well, first head to Cambridge, right? And try and get your readings in medieval linguistics, right? Because that's the only way. Right? I think both of us are going to tap out before we invent our own conlang, though I'm sure there are dungeon masters who do that. But for me, I'm like, this is where I'm getting close to this.
Talk about it, but I do not recommend it. But that is in my top tier. But yeah, if you are to the point of inventing your own conlang, then why are you listening to us? But there are lots of things you can do before you get there.
Yeah, I would say, like, okay, you could learn the basics of linguistics to make a interesting sounding thing. I think I'll just say, well, okay, there's phonemes, which are the sounds of a language, right? The distinct sounds. One great way to make a language or naming of an area of people sound different is to edit or emphasize your phonemes. So take out a couple of sounds and don't use them in your names, or use a bunch of sounds repeatedly. Like, Klingon, it's got all those stops and like K's and R's and
this is in my final section. We're jumping ahead, but yes, what Matt's suggesting is you pick syllables, you pick sounds that sort of like work together, and this is very subjective. If you're not a linguist, if you are a linguist, then you probably know how this works. But trying to get this right and having it not sound stupid is a challenge. But you can, you pick. Klingon's a great example. It's got a lot of talks and cores and raxes and ogs, and you just sort of plug those in until you get a name that sounds plausible. Actually, like Tolkien's dwarvish language is similar. I found that I can kind of approximate what a dwarf name would sound like, because there's a lot of like very similar sounding syllables. It's very easy for this to sound kind of like ridiculous if you aren't thinking about like what a name would sound like, and also practice saying it, right? Make sure that you are actually saying it to make sure that you can and it sounds right.
Something like Klingon is too far for even me, right? Unless I'm running my Star Trek game and people have given it to me, because it's very difficult. It's supposed to be difficult for people to say. And maybe if you want an alien language, that's kind of what you're going for. I find the opposite approach of just like deleting a couple phonemes. So like deleting, if you don't want to learn what a phoneme is, that's fine. Just like delete a couple consonants or some vowels from your name creation. Say, I can't use these. And then boom, you'll have some consistency because of that repeated emphasis on one of the phonemes.
I'm going to give an example, and I want to be clear that this is not meant as any sort of judgment or casting aspersions on other languages or foreign speakers. But when I studied abroad in China, my name, Robert, is relatively challenging for a native Chinese speaker to say. So they gave me a different name. They called me Luo Buta. Which is, that sounds like Robert, close enough, right? But this is a good example of how you can, just remove some letters, some phonemes, some consonants, and get a similar sounding name that is, unique to a region or a period. And there's a lot of, again, if you are a Westerner and you travel to China, they'll probably give you a name like that because they have a different set of core sounds that they work with than we do. And there's lots of languages like this.
Yeah, no, all languages have their like crazy quirks and rules, and again, stick close to the native language of your players, like without going too far. Like just emphasize or subtract a little bit, and it won't be a hassle for you or for them. What else is in this advanced tier? I have like one or two things.
Here's a medium difficulty one, Matt.
Yeah,
and this is to take a regular name and give it a little spice. And this is a beloved tactic of young adult authors. And I don't mean that necessarily pejoratively, but all the names I'm going to give as an example, I pulled from young adult novels. So, you have an obvious one like Katniss. Kat's a pretty normal name, but what if it was Katniss? What if Faye was Feyre? What if Claire was Clary? What if Sarah was Saris? What if Ellen was Elowin? A Rave, Kiela, Kaz. Like, these are all names that are very close to, common English Western names, but with just a little bit of pizzazz. This is very easy to do badly. So I would be careful with this, but a generation of young adult and romance novel writers have made great hay from Sapphire, Darkfire, Wildmount, heroine of their fairy sex books. So it is clearly like workable, but to me, some of it sounds ridiculous. You gotta really like tread that line.
Yeah, I mean, I think for certain types of campaigns, it's perfect, right?
It is perfect.
Yeah. I would say if you want to get like fancier, and this is the fanciest I have ever gone, and I've only done it like twice, which is to create a short list of common, I'm going to use another term here, morphemes, right? So like, okay, these are the like basic building blocks of language. They could be words or parts of words that have meaning. Okay, this little ending, the suffix here means son of or person, and so I'm going to put it at the end of half of my names, right? Perfect. It can give some consistency and some believability to your world. And again, you don't like have to come up with these. You could just steal them from a language that's, you know, not too different from your player's native tongue, right? If they're English speakers, right? Go to Dutch or German, or maybe as far as Latvian or Albanian.
You really don't. I mean, you can be as clever with this as you want, or as not. A really one that works despite the, I think, lack of complexity to it is a lot of the Dothraki names in Game of Thrones. You know, you have Corgo, you have Barbo, Drogo, Jocko, Rakaro. They are not all. They don't all end in, you know, a Geo or an Aro, but a lot of them do. But it works. It kind of works. You know, it is functional. And the truth is that there are actually like languages where everyone's name kind of like sounds very similar. That is not, you know, entirely without precedent. So if your morphemes, like Matt said, are only a couple of things, that's not entirely without, you know, reason. You know, a lot of places in Scandinavia, everybody is named Jorgensen or, you know, Carlson or Magnusson or something. You know, that's perfectly plausible.
Another way to do this like on the cheap without coming up with your morphemes is I often use Google Translate. So I'll just take a list of like 100 words, throw it in there, put it into a language that I want to inspire this region, and then pick the 20 that like that I can say and sound interesting. So I'll like take a list. The example I've got in front of me is a list of words related to rivers and oceans. And there's a website called relatedwords.io that you can use to generate these. Throw it in Google Translate, and then, okay, I've got Udins. Okay, that could be a person's name. Jura. Awesome. Osta. Asis. Right? These all sound a little similar because they're coming from the same language, and they all sound like, nice to meet you, Colony.
Yeah. You know, going back to the morphemes, this works even better for place names. So England is a terrific place to look for, I don't know, prefixes, suffixes, like here's two things that go together. Like the word for, you know, the evolution of castrum from the Latin, the Roman era in England is something like, Castor or Chester. So every town that you've got that's, you know, Winchester, Leicester, you know, Gloucester, Manchester, those are all just like castle towns, right?
Oh, cool.
If you have, you know, something like borough, right? You know, Edinburgh, that's just burg. That's just, a town.
Right. So I think what you're saying is if you come up with a list of like castle, town, river, and then combine them with another thing, then boom, you've got,
right.
Pick 10 morphemes, right? And then you can add some other descriptor to them, right? Yeah. Real historical place names are often not creative at all.
They're
right?
not creative at all. So this was my point here.
It's the big river. It's the hill. You know,
hill. Right. Mutha means mouth. So like Plymouth is just, you know, the mouth of the river. Like I think I had a town called, you know, Estuary in one of my games. Like you can just like that's how things are actually named in real life sometimes is, you know, can you imagine how dumb it would be if you just named a place Portland? Like ridiculous. Like how unimaginative
should have been the Boston of the West Coast.
The Boston of the West. My point is that like it's very easy to come up with
which Boston was like originally Trimount or something. Because there's 3 hills, everyone.
It's that simple. Yeah, I mean, a lot of places it's very easy. You come up with, this is the word for river, this is the word for town, this is the word for hill, and it can even sound like what we a word that we use for hill or river or town, and then you just sort of append a bunch of things to that. Place names are really fun and relatively easy. People's names can get a little bit complicated, but yeah.
And this is where I want to insert a universal tip, which is, I'm cribbing from like advice for writing a novel, which is just to use the first thing that comes to your mind, like a placeholder for, this is the evil mountain. Okay. And then as I'm working through my map, if I can't come up with something better than evil mountain or, Mount Doom, for example, then I'll go to like Google Translate or my list of morphemes. I'm like, okay, I don't have a morpheme for like dark or evil or shadow. Let me add that and combine it with my morpheme for mountain, and then I'm done.
Yeah. This is, Matt mentioned, using Google Translate, and I have one of my personal favorites because it's sufficiently different, but also entirely intelligible, and is not as easy to use Google Translate for because some of these languages are either dead or mostly dead or out of practice. But is
the Boston accent? Yes,
is to pick names from like Occitan, Gascon, Languedoc, the pre-French, pre-Italian Romance languages of sort of like the southern part of France. These are all very close to Spanish, French, and Italian, but they're different enough that you can pull some really interesting names. You can find a map.
Considering there's only 100,000 Ossetian speakers left, you're pretty safe that you don't have one at your table.
Catalonian is close-ish, but even that sounds different. And you can find like a map of southern France with, written in Occitan, and, Toulouse is Tolosa, Marseille is Marcella, Foix is Foix, Avignon is Avignon. These are very close, but this is just like, this to me is like a really easy way to come up with some very plausible, I mean, they're real names, right? In a real language, there's a Romance language. But this is, sort of like this fits in my medium difficulty, like a lateral, slightly harder than just pulling a list, but not as hard as like having to make up a bunch of stuff yourself.
What are some other advanced techniques before we get into maybe just any other random tips and tricks that we have? Are there any other really fancy ways to come up with your people and place names?
This is not super advanced, but it's tricky, and that's to pull like from a completely dead language. And Latin doesn't count, that's too easy, but like, you can find lists of names in Sumerian or Akkadian or other dead or mostly dead languages, Minoan, and this is hard because they sound kind of different. People don't really speak like that anymore. But, names like Enkidu, Humaba, Bazi, Alalum, these are names you could use. There's the part of why this is difficult is there's not that much to pull from for a lot of these. Sumerian is probably the one with like the most that we have. We also don't have any idea how any of these things were pronounced for the most part. But if you want to get real fancy, and this, if you're trying to pull an ancient king name or come up with an ancient kingdom, this is obviously like a really easy go-to.
That makes sense. Like if I put someone who's like a wizard or a scholar or a professor in my game, I'm going to go with Alium or whatever that last one you said, because that like fits. So if you have like the placeholder there or like the title for your NPC or place, then you can look at your list and be like, oh, that one just for some reason seems to fit.
I want to recommend, again, we're not saying that you do a conlang, but if you're interested in thinking about this, I want to recommend The Art of Language Invention by David J. Peterson, who is a conlanger. He's the guy who did Dothraki and High Valyrian and a bunch of others for shows back when they were paying
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, whole languages. It's a really interesting book. It is way over my head. I'm not a linguist, but I did find it very interesting. And if if I want to get to the point where I'm smashing syllables together, it does help me like sort of like think about like what works together. I want to. We've mentioned Klingon. We've mentioned Dothraki. You know, I want to give a shout out to believe it or not, Matt, Final Fantasy XIV, because what they have done, they have put so much effort. I guess. Much like 1994 Fighting Baseball, they have put a lot of effort into the Japanese developers have put a lot of effort into coming up with names that sounded plausible. And there's some areas where this like works better than others, but like there's a region of, you know, sort of like pseudo-Catholic medieval types, and the names are all things like, and this is what we mean when we say like close but change a couple of things. Their names like Aymeric or Charlemont or Valroyant or Gilbriant. Like they're, you know, Harshafalt. Like, again, very close to sounding ridiculous, but not quite. And there's another one that's, you know, sort of like not Rome, and there's names like Livia Sasunius, you know, Nero Tolskeva, Xenoye Galvus. You notice that they're just like plugging 3 letters in between. I don't know there's actually like if they mean anything, but it sounds right. It sounds sort of like what a not Roman name would sound like.
Yeah.
I mention this because this is to me like the ideal fantasy name experience. Like it's close, but like different enough, and that's a very like difficult secret sauce, I think, to find. So it's a good. Also, if you were just gonna like pull a name list, you can, Matt was mentioning, just like grab it from a wiki. Grab the Final Fantasy XIV wiki, pull a list of names, because every NPC has one, and that's a great place to go for fantasy names.
It's the same with like good old fantasy setting books from role-playing games. Like you're like, my players are never going to read these.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a bunch of names. I'm going to keep the ones that I like and deploy them. But yeah, the Elder Scrolls games, I feel like, have a million NPCs, and you can find those names lists online, and you can always, unless you're taking an important one, the chances of players remembering the name of the baker they pickpocketed in whatever town in Skyrim are pretty low.
Right.
So you could always tweak them, or you could just take them as they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's
so make a conlang. Wait, don't make a conlang. Let's make sure.
Don't make a conlang unless you want to. That sounds like fun to you. As much as I love to be a huge nerd about this stuff, I have never seriously considered doing a conlang. The most I've ever done is pull a bunch of vaguely words from uncommon languages to put into my games. But if you want to make a conlang, I actually have a friend who is a linguist and does, if not like a full language, like big chunks of it. So if this is what you're good at, by all means do it. This is where Tolkien got his start. So far be it from me to tell you not to.
Yeah. I mean,
what? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
One last very basic like name, just pick a noun: Violet, Sapphire, Gale, Storm, Phoenix, Onyx, Saber. You know, these are, again, to me, it's very easy to set for this to be silly. This is also another thing that happens in a lot of like young adult novels, but also these are very reasonable names that you would encounter in day-to-day life. Just, you know, feel it out.
Listen, it depends on context, right? If all the gnomes in your world live in the forest, you know, maybe their names are Reed and Rose and Petal. But all of the biker names of the cyber biker gang has names that are like related to battle, right? It's not unreasonable that their names are
Not
Storm
unreasonable.
and Onyx, right? They're the names they've given themselves as part of this war band.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, like, related to that, you can just get so common, like, nouns work really well for some things. They're easy to say, they're easy for your players to remember, but you can also, like, get weird with it. I mean, a couple weeks back, right, we read the Texcalan Lee series, and, you know, a lot of the NPCs. A lot of the characters in these books are...
Sorry, I meant to bring that up because that's a really like obvious example of something clever that has been done. And
there's 6 azimuth, 3 seagrass,
6 direction, right? This is And this is cool because this is from, I think, either Olmec or...
We looked it up after the episode, and we still can't remember which one it is. That's
Can't remember,
okay.
sorry. It was, there was a time when I remembered it, and that time has come and gone. But editor's note, it is actually Maya, but also Mixtech and Zapatech and probably some others. Thanks to listener Panka Jeff for letting us know in the Discord afterwards. Good example of like something that sounds a little fantastical, but is rooted in reality, which is why I think those NPCs, those characters sounded like it sounded plausible. Like it worked once I got used to the naming convention that people would be called by these names.
Yeah, and if you're going in a non-fantasy direction, this can work really well. Rob already mentioned like mixing human cultures and naming practices, things that have been happening since the dawn of time, but if you accelerate them or take them in a new direction, it can give your characters and places a far future feel, or, you can get even weirder with it, giving people numbers in their names or like just random letters at the end instead of last names or something like that. Just depends on what you want to accomplish with your names.
Right.
I have some other smaller tips just related to like prep, which my first one is, hey, be smart about this. Yes, you could start your campaign with a list of 1,000 people, place, and magic item names, and that will be great. But realistically, when you go to a new place or have a new session, you'll probably only need 3 to 4 like extra random names in your back pocket for NPCs. So if the players are going to the Elven Village, okay, let's prep 3 extra Elven names, and we're good to go. Don't overdo it.
Yeah. For my mothership game, I have a list of planned NPCs and, some pre-picked out names, but then I just have a couple of lists of like what we talked about, first names and last names. And then I also I put together just off the top of my head, for all my contractors, like characters from my favorite science fiction novels, so there is an Iskandar and a Breck and a Parvati and a bunch of, there's just, so far no one's caught on, but like these are people that are going to die. And so I've just got like a list of, as I think about, as I read things, think about them, I'm just going to put down, some science fiction-y names. And that's, like Matt said, don't overdo it. I guess I guess the point here is I have lists of names in terms of like importance. Like, am I going to be saying this name a lot? Is this person going to be significant? And is this a random merchant in the space station? In which case, I'm just going to roll on a table and pick the name if it sounds nice.
The next thing is that it really matters how you present the names to get the feel right. If your players are raiding a AAA corporation's headquarters, right? Titles and last names are maybe more important, right? It's way more helpful to meet Mrs. Ossoff, senior vice president of cybernetics, right? Than just her first and last name, right? And this applies to like fantasy as well. Like people in fantasy have titles: the Destroyer, the Deceiver, right? And so those can be really way more helpful in selling what you're trying to convey to your players with a limited amount of time and information.
Yeah, this is a really good point. This is also, like Matt said earlier, this is contextual. There's a lot of people that my players meet where they just get a first name because that's all they need and that's all that person is probably ever going to give them. I might know their last name and I might not. But there's also, exactly like Matt said, if they are meeting a corpo or they're meeting a captain or somebody of significance, if in a fantasy campaign they're meeting a lord, they may not know that person's first name right away or ever. They may not. I was listening to a podcast about Nelson and British naval history, and when a person becomes, I don't know, baron or earl or lord of a of whatever, that just becomes their name. Like you're not
Right.
Arthur Wellesley anymore. You're Wellington. You're not whoever he was. You're Marlborough, right? You're not you're Saint Vincent. Like that's just your name all of a sudden. And much the same, like a lot of lords and people of rank in cultures all around the world will be known by their rank or their title or their holdings more than their given names.
Right. And then things can feed off of this, right? It's easier for the players to remember the Duke Hastings, right? And then Hastington or whatever, that gives things a feel
Yes.
and a connection. If you have someone who's a merchant traveling from far away or another adventurer, right? It's it's way more awesome to meet Gory of Trimount. Oh, okay. We saw that on the map before. This person is from Trimount. People call him Gory of Trimount because he's not the Gory from here. This will tell us that this person is not from here, and maybe we can follow up on that.
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning, where like why I think this is fun to do and worth doing instead of just like pulling from a Markov chain is when you know the connections, but also like your players can like notice the connections on their own. That's cool. That's fun. That makes the world feel real. That also like drives play and engagement. That is like an extra step and extra work, but I think it's worth doing and it's fun when it pans out.
My last tip is not really a tip. It's more of just a question for you, Rob, which is like, I like combining two things when they're, at least one of them is in a morphine that, did I say morphine? is in morphine that the players can't understand, right? Right. Where you added one in and maybe you pulled one from the old like language, like lock or bowl or something like that. One of those place name things. How do you feel about, okay, you've arrived at Winterhaven. You have made it through Wyverndale. What do you think about the compound word fantasy trope?
I'm for, this is a really good question. Sorry, you got me started. As we all know, fantasy especially is notorious for compound words. Yeah. Wyverndale and Elfhome and
I'm looking at the 4E default campaign map that came in the DMG.
That 4E was
Stone March, Ogrefist, Dawnforge. There's a couple other ones that I miss. Oh yeah, Winterhaven, Shadowfell. Hammerfast, Thunderspire.
These are overdone, right? But like we've mentioned, this is how things are named in the real world. I live in a town called Portland. So the real thing is like, does it sound plausible?
Wintermist.
Does it sound good? And I actually don't think I have like a really like good rule on this one, Matt. I can tell you sometimes things sound goofy and sometimes they don't. Yes, Shadowfell, unfortunately, years and years and years down the line, still sounds kind of goofy to me, But other like a compound word is a very like useful and functional way to name something. I think if you want to start naming things Firemount or Bladeville or whatever, like you have to be careful and I guess like tinker with it so that it sounds like a plausible combination of words.
Here's, I think, I don't know if I really know either. It's just what works for you. And if you did just all of these, I think it would be fine. I think the answer might be, and I don't really know for sure, but in like variety. Variety is the spice of life and of the spice of having names that sound real. Like I'm thinking of in Game of Thrones in the first book, right? What are the most important places? Right? There's Winterfell. It's one of those compound words. But
so Winterfell is a great example. That's not all that different from Shadowfell, but it sounds better. Like that's just like a slightly better combination of words,
Yeah, I don't know if it's like the W and the L at the end of shadow and fell coming together that make it sound not as good, whereas winter and fell. Anyway, I have no idea. I'm not smart enough. But there's, the most important.
I think a lot of this is instinct, Matt. Like, I think a lot of this is like because I know that George R. R. Martin is a stupid gringo who only speaks one language, but he has a good, he's got an instinct for languages. That, he has an ear for it, for things that don't sound stupid.
I think the other answer why I think his names are, not maybe the greatest of all time, but pretty good, is he keeps, the problem with the compound word is if you have too many stone marches and dawn forges, it gets repetitive. He has Winterfell, right? And he has Old Town and stuff, but he also has King's Landing, which has like a little space in it, and Casterly Rock, right? So not everything has to be a single word, right? It can be a double word. And then you throw in Pentos. Oh, that's a word that's not in the same language. And there are plenty of ones like this in Westeros too.
I think the key here is variety, right? Like, not everything is a compound word, or not the same type of compound word, right? Again, England is a good example here, right? They have compound words from Latin and from, Anglo-Saxon and from Norse and from Celtic. And it all sounds like vaguely English now, but you have a bunch of different place names that are very familiar, but then you also have ones that they're not exactly the same. Not everything is a Worcester,
Right. Put an apostrophe in one, put a of in one, make one about the physical features, right, of the place, make another about a historical event. King's Landing, right? The Mander is because of the Manderleys, right? Okay. Casterly Rock is because of the casters or something like that. I don't remember, but yeah, make some about people, make some about places, and then vary it up. Not everything is one word. Not everything is one syllable. Not everything is the compound word. Just keep some variety, and you get that sort of generic fantasy that a lot of people want to go for.
I mean, yeah, this is a great example, Matt, because there's Sunspear and Highgarden and Harrenhal, but they're Harrenhal, that's just Heron's Hall, right? But it's just mashed together and changed a bit to be interesting, and they're far enough apart and divided by names that are not all compound words. I really I don't want to tell people not to use compound words, but fantasy has long leaned very heavily on them, so they're really more of a flavor.
Yeah, I mean, so Martin uses a ton of compound words. They're all over his thing, but I think if you're gonna go that route, just vary them, right? Yeah. Ofs, apostrophes, spaces, and then throw in some ones that are just, normal or different. You got the town of Derry. Okay, cool.
I think you can get a lot of variety even within like a single language or single language family. You just have to be a little bit more creative.
I'd also say is, especially with names, I think I've given this tip before, is try and, even though it might be realistic, to avoid the same cadence or sounds for NPCs that players meet like one after the other. Start them with a different phoneme or letter or something.
Yes. This is a very easy mistake to fall into if you're not paying attention to it. This is an advanced GM tip. But, you just think about who you're introducing and the order that you're introducing so that you don't have a bunch of Garys and Barrys and Derrys, all one right after another, a bunch of goblins named Greg. Just be aware. Again, I fall into this trap all the time. I have presented my players with NPCs that were essential to the campaign that they could not tell apart because I didn't give them names that were distinct enough. So,
and a title can get you out of this, right? If you add that, if you've run into this trap before, add a title or some sort of moniker. And, you could use the same morpheme for every place name, but maybe as a joke, yes, the kobolds start every word with Drax, right? It's there's Draxhold and there's Draxville and
Draxville and Draxrun and Draxmouth and actually that would be funny. This is great. You should do that.
Well, Glenn Allen, what's a name? Any final tips or thoughts for our dungeon masters or Mr. Mixon?
Well, Mr. McDickle, I think this is so much fun, and I'm glad we talked about it. But like a lot of this, I think comes down to vibes, instinct. There are some. What did I read recently? Red Rising, which was a fun book that I really enjoyed. Revolution on Mars, but also it's the Hunger Games, and everyone had a dumbass name in that book. I can't even remember a single one of them because they were all stupid, but I liked it anyway. So like this is, and I mentioned I mentioned Katniss earlier in the Hunger Games. Everyone's got a stupid ass name in Hunger Games. Sorry, fans, don't get mad at me, but Coriolanus Snow, excuse me, I don't think so. Yeah. The point I'm making is that don't obsess about this, but the example of Game of Thrones is one that shows when it's right, it's cool. It's really neat when it works and really adds depth and complexity to the setting. But yeah, don't overdo it.
Don't overdo it and focus on what's going to help you in your next session. Yeah. Those couple random names, those important NPCs and places. Names can be the real draw for players to investigate or be interested in that. And you can't go wrong. You can give your antagonist a real villainous name, or you can give them a very friendly sounding name, and either will work well, right? Just as long as you give everything a name. Yeah.
The reason to do this is it will make we've given this advice before, and hopefully you believe us, but the thing that I need the most, even in games that I'm running from a module, is a list of names. I always need not many, but a few every session, just because the players are always going to ask me, well, what's his name? What's the merchant's name? What's the guard's name? What's this passing messenger's name? And I'm like, well, I don't know. So this is worth doing at its most base level, but the more that you prepare, in my experience, the more comfortable you'll feel.
If you always struggle with your players caring about your world, this is your players telling you they care about this NPC, even for a moment, maybe for longer, or the place that they're going to. And if you give it a cool name, it's going to help them do that better.
This could be good or bad, but if you're not careful, you'll end up with a talking horse named Invictus, which you have to, carry through for an entire year-long campaign because you just pulled a name out of your ass. So that's a good and a bad problem, but just be aware that that's what may happen to you.
Sounds like it's from experience, Rob. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. If you have suggestions on how you do names or other naming tips or any other questions for us, you can email us at dmofnone@gmail.com, or you can head over to the link in the podcast description and head to our Discord to chat with us there.
Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Glenn Allen Mixon signing off.
I'm Sleeve McDickle.
And keep rolling them dice.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose. By any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself.